Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of Book Reviews with Johnny Boy. This book today is Bing Crosby, The Hollow Man, and it is published 1981. The authors are Donald Sheperd and Robert F. Slatzer. These two guys. All right, so I think I'm going to read from the sleeve. I don't usually do that, but it really encapsulates a lot of what I want to say. And chances are, unless you guys have a deep interest in Bing Crosby or old books, you're not going to really find this too easily. Maybe I'm wrong, but anyway, I tend to go on thrift books and look up all my interests, and then the ones that have the lower price tag that look really beat up, I buy them. So this was one of those. Okay, so the authors write, "We set out to write the story of a wonderfully witty, bright, talented, and charismatic man, and found also the stuff that Shakespeare's plays are made of. And that was the last thing in the world that we expected to find. This man, Bing Crosby, was many things to many people, but he did some monstrously callous things to those who were nearest and who should have been dearest to him." So what were those callous things? They say basically that on stage he was every woman's dream husband, but off stage he constantly abused his legendary wife, Dixie Lee, leaving for Europe as she lay dying of cancer. On stage, he was everyone's ideal father of the year, but off stage, he was cruel and cold to his children, discarding his first family for a second one, and turning against them as well. On stage, he was a moral, honest man of God, but off stage, he was a desperate, near alcoholic, a lonely man who could betray his friends, such as the original Rhythm Boys, for the sake of his own success. Harry Lillis Crosby, Bing's real name is Harry Lillis Crosby, was a symbol of everything good in the lives of a whole generation, but behind it all, he was Bing Crosby, the Hollow Man. And I would say, from what I've learned about him and of the generation that he lived in, came up in, he probably was not that far afield from many people, projecting a certain image, because that's what society was willing to accept and praise, and then behind the scenes kind of doing things that were kind of acceptable in a certain circles, as long as you keep it hush hush, that type of thing. So let me just explain my relationship to Bing Crosby, which is I'm a lover of Christmas music, and I'm also a lover of, let's call it, the Great American Songbook. As a singer-songwriter and someone who reads music and teacher and kid-friendly entertainer person throughout my life, I always looked for music. I was attracted to music that you could find in books and that was appealing to all generations. And as I looked up popular songs throughout my life, from 1800s, could even been earlier, 1800s, late 1800s, early 1900s, up through 1950, possibly a little further. All the most popular songs you're going to find, an incredible percentage of them have been sung by Bing Crosby. So I just keep meeting his name in that way. And then, I loved songs like White Christmas and Christmas Song and Silver Bells. I don't remember all the ones that he made famous, but so many Christmas songs I identified with his voice. And certainly White Christmas. And then I had this record of him singing Irish songs, even like I think a Beatles cover, and he was just all over the place doing like every popular song, and then a lot of nuances and nooks and crannies, like Let's do a little Irish music. Let's do some old American music. Let's hear these swing songs, hear these lullabies. You know, he really covers the gamut. Of course, tons of show songs and plenty of love songs. So here's this guy, and you know, somehow whatever movies I caught him in, a couple of years ago, I started watching some Bing Crosby movies. Just interested in him, particularly White Christmas and Holiday Inn. Because of the music, I was drawn to those movies, and they seemed like huge movies. They weren't that great, in my opinion, but I did see why people liked them and why Bing was sort of worth knowing about, let's put it that way. But I did sense he was way blown out of proportion, kind of like Elvis later, maybe Frank Sinatra, you might say. Just like a little too much attention to one person, you know. That's my opinion. Anyway, so led me, you know, I love reading autobiographies. So this is a biography, and I did feel that, like, you know, he had this very clean Father of the Year, man of God image, and it just didn't make sense to me, really. But I thought, hey, maybe. But then I saw the Bing Crosby, the Hollow Man. I'm like, ooh, okay. That might have to say a little something to me about how he could be that popular and that big. And he had over 1,600 sound recordings with his name on it. His filmography is huge. I finished his book on Christmas Eve, interestingly, as I associated him with Christmas. That was cool. But I didn't, until New Year's Day, I didn't finish the book because I finished like the story part, but then I wanted to read the filmography, which describes all his films, who was in them, you know, the production, who did the music and all that, the years. Just because I like to be aware of names, and then I like to take notes of names so that I can know which character crosses various interests of mine. So like I read a book about the 20s and reviewed that. I read a book about the 50s and reviewed that. Now Bing Crosby. So there are a couple of names that cross over, not that many, but that's always fascinating to me. Like, what's a key name that's going to help me understand a time period of American history or global history? So I came up with some names that are associated with Bing Crosby are Bob Hope, Jimmy Van Heusen or Hewson, Johnny Burke. These are songwriters that he worked with a lot. Al Rinker and Harry Barris, those two were in this group called the Rhythm Boys when Bing was coming up in the 20s. So apparently Bing came from, I think it was Tacoma, Washington, moved around once or twice, and then his family grew up there, and he was kind of this ordinary kid who didn't try too hard. He just kind of let things come to him, and he took the easy way out type of kid, you know, not going to exert himself. But he had this knack for singing, and then crossed the country from Washington, Northeast Washington, I think it was, down to Hollywood in the early 20s, mid to early 20s. And so he was born in 1903, roughly. It's not 100% clear, but so then, in the 20s, he was, about 20 years old or so when he went down there. And then he started to have some minor success with his friend, Al Rinker. They were doing this duet. Of course, they lived together, and they were both golfers. And eventually, they got hooked up with the Paul Whiteman Orchestra. It was a huge name in jazz, even today, historically. Of course, sort of real jazz people will argue that Paul Whiteman's not the king of jazz. He's not true jazz, but he did play a significant role in putting jazz into the public consciousness. So I don't think anyone could argue that. And his band did create many wonderful jazz recordings. So did he originate it? No. Was he the best? Maybe not, but he was certainly probably one of the most visible at that time in the 20s into the 30s. And so anyway, Bing ended up working with Paul Whiteman, and then his duet, him and Al Rinker, became Bing, Al Rinker, and this guy Barry Harris. Harry Barris, Harry Barris, a piano player, songwriter. They were like having a lot of success because the duet kind of faded out. It was doing well, then all of a sudden people lost interest. So then they had the third component, third guy. It picked up again. People liked it. Then he just they have this engagement at a club. I think it was the Coconut Grove in LA, and he ends up leaving the band, just walking out the contract, walking out his friends, just kind of never looks back, and kind of vague promises to continue with the group, but just goes solo and leaves people hanging. And then he got married. They got into movies, got married, and he had this kind of connection to the Catholic Church. He was a altar boy growing up, so he was kind of, quote, very Catholic, even though who knows how many girlfriends he had while he was married, which I don't think is a very acceptable Catholic thing to do. But he did have some sort of stubborn morals. I think part of it was certainly that he had a public image to maintain, and if it was tarnished, the money and the gigs weren't going to be flowing in anymore like they were. So there was something called the Crosby organization, which his brothers were involved with, maybe parents to a degree, and basically designed to kind of protect his reputation and then invest the money he was making. At some point he started to just make a lot of money from sound recordings and from movies and for just appearances, just singing in clubs, and then he got some good advice apparently here and there. He loved Hollywood circles, and he loved rich people and talking to rich people and finding out how they became rich, especially old rich, not new rich, like people from European families who, had money for maybe centuries. He was curious about that, and he wanted to become rich. He had a Gatsby era, people say, where he was fascinated with becoming rich, and he made countless investments in businesses. He was involved with orange juice. He was involved with golf courses, with clubs, probably with his own record labels or management. I don't know, but the list was flabbergasting. I couldn't believe how much business investments and companies he had attached to his name. He must have been astronomically well off for the time, for a certain period of time. Maybe others were much more rich, I don't know, but for an entertainer that just was this kid from a pretty poor family in Tacoma, Washington, he became very wealthy, and a lot of people benefited from that, being in the Crosby organization. So it was this weird thing, I guess there must have been some heart in him to, provide for the people around him, but who knows what his motivations were. It's really hard to say. I didn't get the picture from reading this book that he was a bad guy. I definitely didn't get the impression that he was a villain in any way, that he was intentionally going out to harm anyone, or it wasn't like that. It was more super self-centered, someone who preferred to take the easy way out, so he would prefer to just cut people out of his lives and just never see them again, avoid them, or pretend that they never had history together, type of thing, with girls or with former, collaborators, things like that. Again, evil is not the word that comes to mind, but kind of a small heart, it seemed, and definitely very, forgive me if you're in the Crosby family and this hits you the wrong way. I don't know the truth, but this is what seems to be what the authors are saying. And Could be. And hey, you could be talking about one of my, family members from another time period that lived this way, and hopefully I wouldn't be offended. I would just accept that, yeah, that's how that guy was. I don't know. I don't know about my own grandfather. Not much. If someone wrote a book about him, and I learned these things, some unsavory things, I'd be like, all right, shit, okay, well, that's who he was. From one perspective. But anyway, they didn't really want to write a book like an expose about Bing. They wanted to write a book about Bing Crosby, like covering his life more thoroughly than others had done. And they just kept on coming up with these like contradictions. The other books written about him said this, maybe some family member said that, and then these people who work with him said something else. Some other family members said something totally different. They're like, whoa, this just isn't adding up. This isn't very cool. So they really did a deep dive to try to, set the record straight. That's kind of that's why they call it the Hollow Man, because they really wanted to point out that this guy, they never said a thing against him in terms of his talent or his charm or his charisma. They're clearly fans of him, the guys who wrote this book. But they had to just try to like tell it like it is type of thing. They didn't want it to write it. And I could imagine being a fan of someone and then you try to tell the story, you just can't ignore certain realities, So again, it's not that he's a monster, but callous, inconsiderate, selfish, maybe. And maybe the people around him were, especially once he was in the industry, maybe that was commonplace. And so he's like, hey, this guy does that, this guy does that. I could do this, whatever. I don't really know exactly what his kids think of him, but it seemed like some of them were kind of wounded, at least at the writing of this book, 1981. Like Gary Crosby had had alcohol problems prior to this, and his oldest son, and kind of felt a little bit abandoned by his father. It kind of sucks. I don't know how that happens, I don't know what contributed to that happening, but that stinks. So, and that when his first wife was dying, Bing went off to Europe to do a film, and the idea was that it was like better for him mentally or something, but I don't know. They had to have a very unique situation, relationship between them. I can't speak to that, but it doesn't seem like something I would want to do personally, But he did like get to see her, like he made it back just in time the day before she died or something, after being away for weeks and weeks in Europe filming this thing as she was laying dying. And the second wife was kind of a better match for him, but like there was like so many false starts. Let's get married, and then he pulls away, and then maybe she pulled out of it, and whatever. But it's kind of like if this is like a year of disclosure, 2026. For me, learning about the truth of stars, especially historically, like this guy was one of the biggest stars of all time, certainly in the 1900s. Maybe nowadays you might not think of him so big, but he was tremendous. He was, before Elvis, he was one of the biggest stars there was. And Frank Sinatra was in between. So Bing Crosby, then Frank Sinatra, then Elvis. Those were kind of like the first superstars. So, obviously, something's going to be imbalanced in the life of a superstar. So I recommend it if you're very curious about Bing Crosby or about kind of old Hollywood and the music business, film business. Yeah, I recommend it. If that doesn't interest you that much, obviously, maybe skip it. But it was not hard to read. I read it kind of fast, and I didn't think I would. The print it's not too small, not too big. I like bigger print, but Not that many pictures in here. Some. This is Dixie Lee, his first wife. I'm still a big Crosby fan, you know. That didn't change. But at least I have a little bit more of a realistic view on who he was, I feel. Here's his later second family. Well, that's all for now. That's my 20-something minute book review. Okay, till next time, keep on reading and being happy.